All right, my name's Dan. I'm the lead minister at Momentum. Sorry you had to meet me. So last year, some of you heard this story, but it's a really cool story. Last year, 2025, I was out of town speaking in Indianapolis for a pastor friend of mine, filling in for him while he was on sabbatical. And that Sunday, someone put something on my desk in my office. And I didn't discover it till later that week or the next Sunday, and I came in, and there's this big old envelope on my desk, and it's real cushy, like is there a t-shirt in there? And so I grabbed it, I was like, oh, that's crazy. Someone got me a t-shirt, cool. And so I opened it, and inside of it was a card and $20,000 in cash. It was cash, and I was like, I'm glad I didn't say I don't want a t-shirt and threw that away. And so I was like, what? And so the card said this, it said, thank you for helping people win. $20K for 20 years of moving people forward to love God, love people, and make disciples who make disciples. And I was like, they're thanking me. That's so sweet of them. No, they were saying, thank you, Momentum, for helping people win. And I was like, man, this is so cool. Someone said for 2025, which was our 20th year being in existence, really officially everything started May 1st, 2005. And it had been 20 years, and we were kind of celebrating that last year. This is when the launch team showed up on the ground at Cleveland. And we were like, all right, let's start serving in neighborhoods. It was well before we even had worship services in 2006. And so they were saying, happy anniversary, 20 years. And so I got to thinking, I was like, man, well, somebody already, did that. So it's up to another family to celebrate the 21st year this year. Just kidding. But yeah, I was like, wow, this is so cool. But I love that person saw, or that people, whatever, it was anonymous. So it could be a person, it could be a family. I love that they saw the connection between our money and the mission of Momentum. Like, what a cool thing that they were like, there's a connection. This money is going to go toward God's mission, Jesus' mission for the church, to help people move forward spiritually, to love God, love people, and make disciples, spiritual apprentices, students of Jesus, followers of Jesus who also make disciples. I was like, what a top shelf example of cheerful giving. And so the why behind it had to do with the mission of Momentum. Move people forward to love God, love people, and make disciples who make disciples. That comes from, by the way, love God and love people are what Jesus said are the two greatest commandments. We call them the great commandments because Jesus said, here's number one, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Number two, love your neighbor as yourself. That's love people. And then the other thing is Jesus' great commission. So the great commandments and the great commission, which is go into all the world, all nations, and make disciples. So this week we are wrapping up a short money series. It's a week longer than we thought it would be, but we're wrapping up a short money series called Mo Money. Mo is short for Momentum, name of our church. And in this series, we've been talking about how to be on mission with our money. And so Jesus talked a ton about money. And so we were like, okay, how do we love God with money? How do we love people with money? And this week, how do we make disciples, apprentices of Jesus, with money? So if you want to turn to Matthew 28, you can download the Bible app for free, or there's a free paperback Bible underneath the seat in front of you. You can take your time, get to Matthew 28. In the meantime, let me give you a very fast summary of the last 2 weeks of this series. Week 1, we talked about loving God with our money. And if this is your first time here, this is going to be really quick. So you're going to be like, whoa, that's like a crazy faith step thing to talk about. Well, we did a whole sermon on it a couple weeks ago. But the idea was, how do we take the principles of Scripture, and love God with our money? And we talked about this thing in the Bible called first fruits giving. And so we said one way that you can do this is you can make the top line of your budget to show that it's the priority, the first thing, the most important thing. You can make the top line of your budget your Love God Fund, okay? So it begins with that, which is a first fruit tithe of giving 10% or more all to God, back to God. And that's the first, it represents the best, and that's what we call a tithe or a tenth. Week 2, actually my son Zion, who's only preached twice here, he spoke and he talked about loving people with money. And he talked about the idea of putting in a love people fund. And so this is cool because this is any amount you want. This is above and beyond the tithe thing. And to say, okay, we're going to have a love people fund. And it can be whatever amount we want. And whenever we see a need, we can decide, do we want to help that person with that need? And if you don't see a need for a month or two, let's say, then it just accumulates in your account. And then when you see a need, you can say, okay, now there's a need. Now we've had this accumulating Love People Fund. Let's give to this thing. So that's an example of what we talked about the last couple of months. So now we're at making disciples with our money. So after Jesus died on the cross, he rose from the dead 3 days later. He gave his followers a mammoth-sized commission, a mission in the world. What's your job, followers of Jesus? The Great Commission. And it says this, Matthew 28. Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you." So this is an incurable belief of Momentum. And Jesus following churches all around the world is that what God did through Jesus on the cross, through the resurrection, is such great news for the entire world. Like what is accessible to us through Jesus because of the cross and the empty tomb, it's incredible good news. And so we want to move people forward and make disciples of Jesus by all means possible, any way that isn't sin. Like we will do anything, try anything to show people God's love and his goodness and his truth, as long as it doesn't cross the line of, well, you can't do that. We're doing anything we can because this is such good news to the world. And so this message is going to be kind of a combo of the last two messages, but also kind of the payoff of those two messages. One of the biggest game changers, I really believe, for people to become generous, that are kind of like, I don't want to give money away to anything other than my stuff, myself, or whatever. I think one of the biggest game changers for generosity is for people to see and understand the connection between their treasure and making disciples of Jesus. To see the direct connection between my income and people's lives being changed. And it can sound real manipulative. And so, this is one of those things where it's like, if you don't know the preacher, I don't know this guy's credibility. I don't know if I trust him. I get that. But if you know me, then you're a little bit more to be like, yeah, okay, I can trust. There is a connection there. We can make disciples with our money. And that is a game changer when you can see that. Here's my money. But when I use it to make disciples, lives can be changed. So how do we make disciples with our money? Well, first, let me spend some time talking about this, because I said this is a combo of the last 2 weeks. It does really begin, a lot of it happens with that Love God Fund. Like, think of all the ways that we make disciples together with our giving when we give to God through the local church, through our Love God Fund. It's interesting. God's like, hey, trust me. This is week 1. Trust me. This takes faith, but give me back a portion, at least 10%, and I want you to trust me in this way. But isn't it crazy that then God uses that money that collectively comes in from people, and he says, okay, a byproduct of that is I'm going to use that to fund my mission locally and globally. So think about that. So this money is pooled together, and a byproduct of our obedience to God is he accomplishes his mission. It's not like God's up there like wringing his finger like how he's going to pay the light bill in heaven. We don't give and the money is transported to heaven. It's still here. It has to be used for something, and there's very practical purpose. So, for instance, in the Old Testament, before Jesus came to earth, before God became a baby in Bethlehem, in the Old Testament, when people tithed, so all these Israel, the Jewish farmers, they would give 1/10 of their grain or 1/10 of their orchards or herds or flocks. They would give them to God as a tithe. Well, that tithe went somewhere. It went to God's storehouse. And out of that storehouse, these piles of great fruit and grain and all this stuff in the storehouse, that is then used to feed widows and orphans locally. But it's also used to take care of the priests who served God and mediated for God with the people, did the sacrificing for people. Because when the Israelites were wandering in the desert for 40 years, and God was like, I'm going to give you a land, it's the promised land. It was this land called Canaan. What happened was, when they finally got into the promised land, God's like, okay, there's an allotment for the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm going to allot you, I'm going to give you portions of Canaan so that you can have your own properties in this new place, Canaan. But there was one tribe out of the 12 tribes that didn't get property, and that was the Levites. They were the priests, and God basically told them, I am your portion. Like, you will serve the people, and I will take care of you. Well, how did he take care of them? Everybody tithed out of the 11 tribes, and the Levites, were supported through God's storehouse. So meaning they couldn't farm. They were doing ministry. They didn't have land. They weren't given land like everyone else. So they couldn't farm, and they were ones that were supported out of that too. So the Levite priests were there. So what I just think is cool about that was people gave to God, but then it was used for very practical purposes to expand God's mission and to fulfill God's mission on earth. Another really cool example of this. So in the mornings, I'll spend time working through a book of the Bible, just like my personal time with God, not for like a sermon I'm prepping. But one of the cool things I learned within the last couple of years, I don't remember when, I was like, oh, this is such a cool aha moment. Think about the Christmas story, if you know it. If not, one thing you probably recognize are the wise men, which are called magi in the Bible. So Jesus is born in Bethlehem. These mysterious people show up from the east, and they come to meet Jesus. They're like, hey, a king is born. We're following the star, and we know that there's this king. There's prophecies about him. They go through Jerusalem, and they go to see King Herod. King Herod's like, what? A king's born? I'm king. And in his mind, he's like, tell me where this kid's at. I'll kill this kid because he's a threat to my throne. And so they go 5 miles further to Bethlehem, and they find baby Jesus. What do? They worship Jesus by giving treasure. So they give treasure to Jesus, as in Matthew 2:10. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Very expensive things that they gave as gifts to Jesus. So then an angel appears to Joseph, basically Jesus' stepdad, Mary and Joseph, appears to Joseph and is like, hey, get this kid out of here, because King Herod is threatened by him, and he's going to start killing kids. He's going to look for Jesus. So it says in verse 13, when the Magi, had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Go south. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Okay, so think about this. A careful reading of that story shows you Mary and Joseph are not well off. They have to later, when Jesus is born, give an offering at the temple. They give the poor person's offering at the temple, a couple of birds. And that tells you right away, like, oh, they're not well off at all. How in the heck did they afford, seriously, food on the road for a trip to Egypt for who knows how long until things blow over? They're on the road eating all the time. They have to find some place to stay in Egypt. How do they afford this trip? How do you think? The treasure that was given by the Magi in worship to Jesus. Isn't that cool? Like, the idea is these are treasures given to Jesus in worship, and they're like, okay, they're going to have to serve a practical purpose because God just commanded us to run to Egypt. How are we going to pay for that? The treasure, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It's like we give treasure to God, and it doesn't make it any less God's treasure that he's like, okay, now I'm going to use it for practical purposes to accomplish my mission. You guys have got to protect this child so that he can be raised to teach, perform miracles, and heal, and ultimately die on the cross and rise from the dead. That is the mission, and we're going to fund it with these treasures from the Magi. So our income becomes such a major resource for practical purposes to make ministry happen and to help people be discipled. And so we have our Love God fund of tithing, and we offer that as our treasure to Jesus. And God's like, okay, it's not like I need your money. I want your faith, your trust in me, and now I'm going to use this as a byproduct for practical purposes. So examples of that are when we give together, to Momentum. We get to throw this party that costs like $9,000 every August. It's always like kind of inching forward of like how much it costs to do the back to school festival in our front yard, in our side yard, on the roof, wherever we can get people. And so we do this big festival, and all that is to show people practically the love of Jesus and to accomplish our mission. Like, we want people to see the good news of Jesus. We want to be the good news to Jesus, of Jesus to them. We want them to hear the good news from us if we get an opportunity. And so that's one of the ways we try to fulfill our mission. And hundreds of people come to that, tons of families, parents and grandparents and kids, and we get to be good news with the hope of fulfilling our mission to make disciples. Last year, from all these offerings, these first fruit tithes and these offerings, last year we spent over $15,000 to get kids and students to church camp because we really believe it's a catalyst for making disciples and for life change to happen. And so over $15,000 supported and helped people not have to pay much, for their kids to go to an expensive week of church camp. And man, that is such an example of making disciples with momentum money. And it's an example of us trying to help people win spiritually. Like, man, some of these kids really have a lot of stuff they're struggling with in their heads, struggling with at home, struggling with at school. And we know Jesus is the answer, ultimately, that Jesus will walk with them through that stuff. And so when they go to church camp, they hopefully can connect those dots and follow Jesus. What's really cool about this, some of you know this, but we don't bring this up all the time. Since our first worship service, September 10th, 2006, in Cinemark Theater in Valley View, since that worship service, we have always taken every last dime of our offering, and we as a church have tithed 10% of that and set it aside and said we as a church will tithe and give that away to what we call our multiplication and missions fund. So it's something outside of momentum that we say, okay, God asks people to tithe, and he doesn't tell us to do this, but we're like, how cool would it be if as a church we also trusted God and collectively tithe 10% of that away? And so over the years, like we've given over $200,000 to church planting, like other people starting churches, and we've said, we believe in what you're doing. We've prayed about it. Here's a chunk of money, $50,000 or $30,000 or whatever. And we've given away chunks of money to help other people start new churches because someone did that so momentum could be here. All kinds of individuals and organizations and churches. So that's one example. Some other example, last year, Bella Berna, who grew up at Momentum, went to, our student ministry at Momentum. It was a different name, so I started to say the name of that student ministry, which would mean nothing to you. But now it's called Amplify. She's now doing a ministry with college-age students, which she's in that area. She just graduated college. And so she's in California working with college-age students and doing ministry there. But as many people doing ministry or a mission of some kind, she has to raise her own money. And so Momentum supported her by sending her money at the end of last year to help her with the ministry she's doing. So we're making disciples, college-age disciples, with that money. This is Bella. This is her knucklehead dad, Tom. This is her brother, some more family. This is Isaiah's family. But that's Bella. And so we're making disciples by supporting Bella, one of our own. Another ministry is called Valley of Baca. It's a ministry in Kentucky that's called Valley of Baca Missionary Retreat Center, and it's led by Tom and Claire Moeller, who are just outstanding people, unbelievable people. Shannon, my wife, has known them all of her life. I've known them much longer than I want to admit, which is when I met Shannon. That was more than 3 years ago. So, man, these guys are just unbelievable followers of Jesus, and they have this incredible ministry that provides housing and vehicles for foreign missionaries who, when they come back home stateside, and they come back home because maybe somebody in their family is sick and they want to come be here for or a funeral, or they come back to raise money to go back out into the mission field. They come home for reasons, a lot of times after years, they come home and they provide in this property places for them to stay for free. They house them, and they have a whole roster of vehicles. So when a family comes back from the mission field, here's a minivan you can use for free the entire time you're here driving around. They might have appointments at churches where they present to them what they do in the mission field to raise funds. It saves missionaries thousands of dollars that they don't have to raise more just to be home to raise money. And I love that all the vehicles have names. They have a full roster of vehicles on their website, and their names are like Barnabas and Lily. My favorite is Henry Higgins. So somebody gets to write Henry Higgins. Hey, we got Henry Higgins while we're home, It's just such a fun thing. But and we get to make disciples through them serving foreign missionaries who are making disciples in countries around the world. How cool. Another one is Mark. Chris and Denise Williamson are a part of what's called Mark. It's Missionary Aviation Repair Center. So a lot of these are basically aviation mechanics. I have a coffee mug from Mark, I might say. And unlike most sitcoms where people drink out of empty cups, I put something in this cup. Because doesn't that drive you nuts? It drives me nuts when someone's walking around with an empty Starbucks cup in a sitcom. I'm like, there's nothing in that cup. Somebody just filled the cup with water. Okay, obviously not an issue for you. It's an anger issue for me. But Mark is Missionary Aviation Repair Center. This is in Soldotna, Alaska. Been there. It's so cool. Soldotna is Russian for soldier. And it's this little town there where this place exists. And they have a hangar. Maybe it's technically hangars. But all these little prop planes inside of it. And Jeremy Speth, one of the guys here at Momentum, and I have been there together. I've been there a couple times already to preach for local church and church camps and students. But check this out. They have a hangar full of little prop planes, and they fix and maintain those aircrafts all as ministry. They also do it for local pastors who have their own prop planes. They'll maintain them, tell them what to do, take care of them, all that kind of stuff. Then they train missionary-minded pilots and mechanics. And get this, mainly what happens is through those planes, whether they're doing it or they're empowering other people to do it, they fly food and supplies and people to places and churches in Alaska where there are no roads. Like, you can't drive to these places, and that's a lot of Alaska, y'all. Do you think it was bad here last Sunday? I seriously was on the phone with my buddy last week from Alaska, Caleb Beck, and he was like, how's it going? I was like, you're the one person I can talk to on the phone that won't empathize with me at all. But it's terrible here. You can't drive on the roads. We've run out of rock salt, apparently. And he's like, oh, gosh. He's like, that's like a dusting for us. What'd you get? 8 inches? You know, I've been there. Like, the snow's piled up as high as this freaking building. And so it's just like, I don't even know what I was talking about. No roads. There's no roads in a lot of places. So they fly supplies to the missionaries who are at these churches, the ministers. They fly supplies to them when their village doesn't have a lot of eggs or milk, things like that. This is nuts. One of the things that they do is they fly to these places that don't have roads. They pick up kids and they fly them to church camp. Isn't that nuts? Like, kids want to go to church camp. Their mom can't drive them. And in a minivan, we're heading to church camp. No, somebody flies there in a prop plane, picks them up, takes them to church camp. It's basically, they expand the reach of the gospel to isolated people in Alaska, and we helped that happen last year. It is such a cool ministry. I love the Valley of Baca and that ministry because they're such cool examples of, these aren't preachers. These are people who fix minivans in Kentucky so missionaries can use them. These are people who know how to work on planes so that people can use them to advance the gospel and make disciples. By the way, this picture, which is great, it's like people being flown somewhere they need to get to, ministry purposes. Who's taking this picture, bro? You know who it is. It's the pilot. I was on a plane, just me and a pilot, the first flight I had in Alaska in one of these little planes. And I was like, whoa, I feel like a celebrity. It's just me and my pilot. And I was like, check this out. I'm taking video pictures, and I look up, and all of a sudden, he's up there, no hands on anything, looking through a manual. And I was like, dude. And he's like, oh, you want me to take a picture of you? You know, so it's just such a cool ministry. And that is an example of how God takes what's in the storehouse and is like, disciples are being made around the world with the way that we trust God with our finances. Okay, so let's go another step then. How do we make disciples with our Love People Fund? That's the Love God Fund. That's some of the stuff that happens when we give. Well, what if I have this optional, I'm going to start throwing money in my Love People Fund. How do I use that? Well, in Luke 16, Jesus tells this really crazy parable that's always like, every time I read through it, I'm like, wait a minute, what is this again? But it's basically this parable. It's called the parable of the shrewd manager. And Jesus talks about a manager who is facing dismissal. He knows he's about to be fired, and he goes to people who owe his employer money. So he goes to people who owe his master money. They have all these debts, and he settles their debts for 80 cents on the dollar and 50 cents on the dollar. Like, there's no money coming in, and he's like, okay, how about, I'm going to work out this deal with you. What about 50 cents on the dollar, which is sometimes what you do with credit card companies. You're like, okay, I got this debt, but all I got to give you is, I get 30 cents on the dollar. And so he's like, okay, 50 cents on the dollar, we'll take care of this, we'll wrap it up. And after he does this, first he brings in money for his master that might not have come in because some people don't pay their debts. And he strategically secured friendships with all these debtors by knocking down the price. And so, surprisingly, the master commends him for his foresight. And then Jesus, after telling that story, you're like, that story's insane. Jesus made it up, okay? Jesus then says, this is how he drives the point home of the parable. Luke 16:9. Jesus said, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Okay, that sounds like some weird Dale Carnegie kind of thing, like learn people's names, then they'll be your friends, make friends and influence people. No, listen to what he means by this. He says, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Okay, Jesus is urging his followers to be wise and intentional with money that you won't always have. This money will be gone eventually. You can't take it with you. So this money will be gone one day regardless, and use those temporary resources for eternal purposes. Have foresight. And so everything we own should be used to expand or to further God's eternal kingdom. And so we're supposed to use our master's resources to further our master's goals. So what he's saying is, have foresight when it comes to the temporary value and utility of money. Use money in a way that it will have an eternal ROI, an eternal return on investment. He's basically saying use worldly wealth to gain friends by serving them and impacting people with your money. And then one day, you're going to see those people in heaven, some of them, because of the way that you used money. So use your money to make disciples, to get people to heaven. Author, pastor Rick Warren wrote this once. He said, Jesus is not saying in this parable that you can buy your way into heaven, because you can't. Jesus has already paid the price on the cross. It has nothing to do with getting to heaven. Jesus is telling us to use your money to build friendships that will go on and on for eternity. When you use your money to help others meet Jesus, you make friends for eternity and gain rewards for eternity. And he wraps it up by saying this: there's no better way to use your money than helping people get to heaven. So Jesus is saying use your money, because it's temporary, to get people to heaven, because that's eternal. That is eternal. And that's what he's commending the servant for in the parable, is this foresight. So how can you use your Love People Fund? Well, anytime that you see somebody that you realize they don't have a Bible and you buy a Bible for them. Like, man, and a Bible isn't cheap. There's paperback Bibles that are obviously cheaper, and there's a Bible you can take home and have a Bible, and that's important. But when you buy a Bible and you get a leather bound or whatever, you buy a Bible for someone, that's a chunk of change. But every time you do that, you are storing treasure in heaven. You are making an investment, an eternal investment in someone who might take this to heart and respond in faith in Jesus. Anytime you use your time or gasoline to pick up someone before church who needs a ride, or before Amplify or student ministry, man, you are storing treasure in heaven. That is a way to use your Love People Fund to advance God's kingdom. When you buy a gift card for someone who's grieving or struggling or sick, and you give it to them in the name of Jesus, you're like, the reason I want to do this for you is because I think Jesus would want me to, that there's a connection to Jesus. You are storing treasure in heaven. Rick Warren says, it's the highest and best use of your money. You can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead by investing your resources in people who are going to heaven. That's making disciples with your money. And so again, I think one of the biggest game changers for a person to become generous, as it has been for me, is to see the connection, the direct correlation. Here's my treasure, but when I give it to God, it makes disciples. Like when I give my treasure to God, people, they get to heaven. Like when I give my treasure to God, people grow spiritually. To make that connection is like, oh, man, I can get behind that. I can trust God and give to that. That's for sure. When my son Zion, who preached in the last message years ago when he was 17, I asked him, he started working a job and he started tithing. And that's a huge deal for anyone, no matter what their age. And I said, hey, would you mind making a short video as we do at Momentum? You see tons of these week to week at Momentum. Would you just tell us why you give? Tell us about your generosity journey. So he did like a 90-second video, and then I watched it off Dropbox. And when I watched it, one of the things that he said was this. He said, the money given to the church, he was kind of like, I was in this video, I was kind of concerned about, I don't know where the money goes and what's it used for. And then he said, the money given to the church is insanely valuable. It could make a person a follower of Jesus and change their eternity. And then he gets all mean mugged up into the camera, and he's like, their eternity. Like, and it's such a memorable clip that we show in videos sometimes. And for me as a dad, dude, when I first saw that, I was like, I wish I would have understood that as a high school student. I didn't become a Christian until I was 15, but I was like, what an incredible thing to know. Like, if he holds on to that truth all of his life, he is going to live his life as a generous person. Because there's this direct correlation of when I give sacrificially, people's lives are changed, and he sees it all the time because he's around Momentum. And so what a cool thing. Like, what a proud moment as a dad to be like, he gets it. That is so, so cool. And that's one of the biggest game-changing connections you can make. I read this great little book a few years ago by a leader in the New England states. I think he's in Vermont. His name's Bo Chauncey, and he said this is a simple matter. When you give, heaven grows. You can fight it, argue about it, try to reason it away, but there is no denying. Amen. Amen. Name of Jesus. You can fight it, argue about it, try to reason it away, but there is no denying that giving matters. Ultimately, there are only two questions to consider. Will you invest in eternity? And if so, how much? And it's this idea of, man, when we give, heaven grows, we're making disciples with our money. There's a late preacher named Wayne Smith, who's just a really funny dude, Southland Christian Church in Lexington, Kentucky. He had a church member one time that came up to him and asked him, Wayne, will I go to hell if I don't tithe? And he was like, no, you won't go to hell, which is absolutely the right answer. This has nothing to do with you getting to heaven or going to hell. You didn't tithe, you're going to hell. It's not like that at all. But he did say this, and it sounds heavy-handed, but it's so true. He said, no, you won't go to hell. He said, but somebody might. And the connection is like, oh, he's trying to help people see the correlation of, I don't have to do this to get to heaven, but when I give, it's used for practical purpose, and the mission of Jesus is advanced, and people go to heaven. I'll finish with this. The 1994 crazy good movie, Schindler's List. You know, there's definitely some inappropriate stuff in it. That it's this powerful film, though, that it's, oh man, it's so powerful. How many, by round of applause, have seen it? Schindler's List? Okay. Yeah, I was like, it's only going to be old people. There will be no young people seeing this, because it was like one of those Oscar-winning, films from back at that time. And it's long and it's heavy. I saw it in this cool theater in Huntington, West Virginia, when I was in college. But anyways, it won 7 Oscars, including Best Film. The epic movie based on the true story of Oskar Schindler. And Oskar Schindler was this ethnic Jewish businessman who was a member of the Nazi Party. And he arrived in a Polish city during World War II, and he was just hoping to make a bunch of money. He was a business dude, and he was like, I see opportunity. And he shows up to make a bunch of money in Poland. So he bribes Nazi officials to acquire a factory so he could produce enamelware. And then he starts hiring Jewish workers because they're cheaper. So he starts hiring all these, and they just cost less, and he wants to make money. It's the bottom line's money. So eventually Schindler was secretly shocked when he saw the Nazis' cruelty. He had identified, as part of that, and then he was like, wow, what they're doing, it's crazy and it's cruel. And so, but he maintained friendly relations with them so that he could continue to get these Jewish workers to come work for him. And as time passed, Schindler's focus shifted from making money to trying to save as many lives as possible. So he's just this German guy who's being buddy-buddy with the Nazis, and he's living a lavish life, and he's kind of a womanizer and all this stuff, but he's starting to get it. When these people work for me, they're untouchable, and they don't go to concentration camps. And I can say, no, don't take them. I need them. And so he in his lifetime, he saved over 1,000 lives, Polish Jewish people, refugees, during the Holocaust, simply by employing them, paying as many people as he could so that he could keep them alive. In fact, there's 7 lists of names of Jews that he hired, and those those names, those lists together are collectively called Schindler's List. And it's just names of Jewish people. In fact, I was in Israel several years ago, went to a museum in Israel. I saw a few of Schindler's Lists in a museum. There's like 3 or 4 of them. I was like, those are Schindler's Lists. And I saw the names listed. It was so cool. And so when the war ended, he ran out of money in 1945, which was right as the Germans surrendered. And when the war ended, Schindler's workers, man, they gave him this ring. It's such a powerful scene at the end of the movie. They gave him this ring with a quotation engraved from the Talmud on it. And it said, "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." And he starts looking at that, and Schindler is so touched by this gift, but he's so deeply ashamed also because he lived so lavishly, and it took him a long time to get it, and all that stuff. Like, oh man, I can save lives with this. So he's so ashamed. And in this heart-wrenching scene at the end of the film, Schindler says, I could have got more out. I could have gotten more. And he has these Jewish associates and friends who are with him, and they said, 1,100 people are alive because of you. And he said, if I just made more money, I threw away so much money. I threw away so much money. I just had no idea. You have no idea how much money I threw away. And his friend, one of his Jewish friends, says, there will be generations because of what you did. And he says, I didn't do enough. You did so much. And at one point, Schindler stumbles over to his vehicle and he says, this car, if I could have sold this car, this would have been 10 people. If I sold this car, this pin, this on his jacket, this would have been 2 people. Why didn't I sell this pin? And it's just this powerful moment where he makes that correlation between his money and saving lives. And he says, man, pretty much, I want to have this chance to go back and make better choices. And for us, if we follow Jesus, we've got this choice if we can just continue to live life spinning around the wheel of consumerism. It's like earn, consume, throw away, repeat. Earn, consume, throw away, repeat. Earn, consume, throw away, repeat. Or like Oskar Schindler, eventually there comes a time in our story where we let God speak to us and we see this truth and we shift from simply storing treasure in heaven, from simply using some of the money to enjoy for sure and using money to live for sure, but we shift to trying to save as many lives as possible, and that's the game changer. I see the connection between my income and saving lives and saving souls. The Bible mentions this thing called the Book of Life, and the idea is that somewhere heavenly there is a book that when someone gives their life to Jesus, their name's written in a book for eternity. Like this person is coming to heaven. And anyone who is a Christ-centered person, any church that's a Christ-centered church, is like, we want to do everything we can to get people's name written in the book of life. Like that's the list that matters, man. We want to get names on that list. Rick Warren says, talking about the parable of the shrewd manager, he said, when you get to heaven one day, imagine there are 100 people standing at the entrance, clapping and cheering and saying, we've been waiting for you. We're here because you spent money to tell us the good news of Jesus. We're now friends for life. No, for an eternity. If it weren't for the way you used your money, we wouldn't have heard about the way to get to heaven. And remember the card with the $20,000 cash in it. I've actually adapted every once in a while. I will look at our giving receipt and I will basically pray, God, here is our tithe, and it is for moving people forward to love you, to love people, and to make disciples who make disciples. It is that connection. I give, and the mission is lived out. In fact, what's really cool is just in a few minutes here now, you are going to see some faces on the stage that I hope that you will be able to picture when you give and be like, that's why I give. I give first and foremost to trust God, but a byproduct is the faces of lives who have been changed by Jesus. Let's pray.